Chapter 3. Dust's Lesson. Trail roughened dramatically. Dust swirled under merciless sun, hell-bent on scorching everything into submission. Grit whipped into his eyes, mountain testing resolve, testing spine. Bass thumped in his skull, glitchy, heavy, rhythms he'd crafted alone. When reality pressed too hard, when walls closed in on 3 separate cell blocks across 3 state lines. Those sounds, his autodidact salvation, patterns arranged and rearranged until they spoke truths no guard could confiscate. Chaos hummed beneath every step, not madness anymore, just a thread tying sprawl together, binding past to present, years spent synthesizing sounds, arranging them rhythmically, creative patterns emerging from noise. Similar patterns now emerged from dust. His fingers twitched, muscle memory recalling how he'd once mixed tracks, how he'd once rolled joints. Addiction's span, weed's dominance, stretched across the same timeline as his musical evolution. Both offered escape, both threatened to consume. Spinoza settled into his thoughts. All is one substance. Dust choking his lungs argued against unity, particles distinct and hostile. Yet paradox held. Every swirl, every breath part of a whole he'd bet his life on. Every synth wave, every bass, drop, every high, every stone cell. One substance expressing itself in infinite ways. Once sharp-edged certainty, everything is everything, now quieter. Truth embedded in mountain sprawl, mirror his fractures couldn't break. 3 incarcerations, 3 states, 3 chances to confront the same lesson. Behind bars, he'd arranged sounds that spoke of freedom. In freedom, he'd chased highs that led to bars, circles within circles. Wind eased, leaving bitter taste. Not just storm, a flicker of hole he'd climbed toward. Storm outside mirrored storm within. His craft had taught him this. Controlled chaos creates meaning. Every track he'd produced contained precisely calibrated tension, release, chaos, order, genesis from noise, pattern from randomness. Peak stood smug in haze. Pressed on, he did. This dust his to face, shard of sprawl he'd outlasted. Addiction's grip loosened with each step upward, though memory of its dominance remained. Synesthetic connection between bass pulses and withdrawals shakes, both rhythms mastered through suffering. Dust particles danced in chaotic spirals, forming temporary patterns, order emerging from apparent randomness. Production booth and prison cell had taught similar lessons. Isolation breeds clarity. Within confinement, whether chosen or imposed, he'd learned to hear underlying rhythms connecting seemingly discrete elements. Recalled Jesus' words echoing across mountain. Unless a grain of wheat falls into earth and dies, it remains alone. If it dies, bears much fruit. Death as prerequisite for rebirth. Track needed silence before drop. Addict needed bottom before recovery. 3 cells across 3 states, each a tomb from which something new emerged. His fractured consciousness recorded and remixed these deaths, these rebirths, audio engineering principles applied to metaphysical quandaries, isolation of frequencies, removal of noise, enhancement of signal. His mind worked similarly now, filtering out irrelevant, amplifying essential. Mountain taught what prison walls had started. Boundaries clarify. Limitations foster creativity. Constraints reveal possibility. Bass thumped louder as wind intensified again. Storm's second wave, rhythmic in its intensification, layered over memory of tracks crafted in darkened rooms, plants growing under artificial lights, bars casting linear shadows across concrete floors, patterns within patterns, lives within lives. Fractured consciousness mirrored quantum reality, neither wholly particle nor wave, shifting between states. Psychiatric establishments had tried collapsing his wave function into diagnosable category. Mountain knew better. Here, he existed in superposition, simultaneously broken and whole. Dust swirled thicker, visibility reduced to arm's length, yet somehow clearer now than in brightest sunshine. Paradox of illumination through obscurity, similar to revelations achieved through mind-altering substances, through sound-altering techniques. Weed's dominance had once seemed pathway to insight until pathway became prison itself. Real transcendence required facing storm, not escaping it. Music production had taught patience with process. Sound waves manipulated, arranged, controlled, yet alive with potential beyond conscious intention. Genesis from chaos, creation from void, each track a universe with its own physical laws, emotional resonance. Now he applied same principles to self, arranging fragments into coherent whole without denying fractures. Spinoza's proposition hummed beneath conscious thought. All things expressions of single substance. Bassline, a temporary manifestation of universal vibration. Dust particles, briefly visible forms within larger continuity. His own consciousness, fractured, imprisoned, addicted, creating another expression of same substance. Unity's paradox made tangible in storm's intensity. Jail taught boundaries. Music taught transcendence within boundaries. Addiction taught hunger. Recovery taught satisfaction within limits. Mountain teaching all simultaneously. Dust its medium of instruction. Incarceration across 3 state lines. Geographical manifestation of inner fragmentation. Sound engineering reconstructed fragments into meaningful patterns. Now climbing reconstructed self similarly, not erasing breaks, but incorporating them into stronger whole. Kintsugi philosophy applied to consciousness. Golden repair, highlighting rather than hiding damage. Storm intensified. Grit between teeth, nostrils, eyelids. Inescapable physicality mirroring inescapable truths. No production booth to hide in, no high to seek, no cell to define limits, just expanse, paradoxically experienced through extreme limitation of visibility. Vastness revealed through confinement. Lesson learned repeatedly throughout fractured timeline. Jesus' words spiraled through dust clouds, grain falling, dying, bearing fruit, death prerequisite for multiplication. His addiction required death. Prison meant death of freedom. Each mixing session meant death of silence, yet from each death, fruit. Lessons impossible otherwise. Growth impossible without constraint. Bass pulsed. Rhythm of walking. Rhythm of heartbeat. Rhythm of universe expanding, contracting. All rhythms he'd studied, synthesized, arranged creatively. Autodidact, not by choice, but necessity. No teacher for the path he walked, sounds he heard, patterns he perceived. 3 incarcerations taught self-reliance. Mountain teaching the same lesson with different methodology. Peak occasionally visible through dust's veil. Destination simultaneously present and obscured. Quantum uncertainty in macroscopic form. Addiction had functioned similarly. Goal of transcendence visible yet consistently obscured by means pursued. Creation offered a clearer path, yet required discipline. Addiction undermined. Circular trap broken only through linear ascent of mountain. Storm began subsiding, particles settling, temporary respite or permanent clearing. Uncertainty, a vital component of experience. No producer could predict exactly how an audience would receive a track. No addict could predict exactly when substance would turn from ally to enemy. No prisoner could predict exactly when release would come. Mountain offered no certainties either, only continuation of path. Fractured timeline, reassembling, not into seamless whole, but functional mosaic. Audio engineering experience provided framework. Separate tracks combined, not by erasing differences, but by harmonizing them. Bass, rhythm, melody, effects, distinct yet unified. Similarly, His divided self, creator, addict, prisoner, seeker, finding harmony without homogeneity. Spinoza's substance, limitless, self-causing, indivisible, manifest in limited, effect-bound, fractured dust particles surrounding him, manifest in his own limited, effect-bound, fractured consciousness. Paradox, not to be resolved, but embraced. Universal rhythm, playing through particular instruments, his unique arrangements, merely variations on eternal theme. Jesus' seed, dying to bear fruit, echoed through dust's settling. Process not complete, death ongoing, birth ongoing, 3 incarcerations, 3 deaths, 3 rebirths. Music produced from each cycle different. Consciousness emerging from each cycle different. Integration rather than repetition. Spiral rather than circle. Peak clearer now, though storm not fully past. Destination not endpoint, but continuation of process. Mountain neither beginning nor end, merely visible manifestation of invisible principle. Like baseline making intangible rhythm tangible. Like prison walls making intangible constraints tangible. Like addiction making intangible hunger tangible. Dust settled on skin, clothing, hair, carried forward now, incorporated, once opponent, now component, synthesis defining his approach to music, to recovery, to integration, taking seemingly disparate elements, arranging them into meaningful patterns, genesis from chaos, order from randomness, wholeness from fracture. Storm passed, but hum remained, quieter now, subtle sting rather than overwhelming roar, bass line fading, but rhythm continuing, peak visible, attainable, yet somehow still distant, path continuing upward, dust lesson absorbed but not concluded, mountains teaching ongoing, sprawl's pattern emerging gradually, unity revealing itself through multiplicity, one substance, one wheat grain, one fractured consciousness climbing toward integration,